Okay, this is right out of your purple book. And so if you want to find this activity, and you can print it off, or it's also in your, it's on the blackboard at the very beginning up there. These are your 10 frames, but this would be the end that you would want to get to, not at the beginning. So I just want you to see what it would look like at the very end. Now when we're talking about a 10 frame, that would be what a 10 frame would look like if it's full. So this is how you teach children what the quantity looks like. So if this number is 11, you can see on this 10 frame it's a little bit different because you've got two 10 frames. The reason is because we're going to eventually build up to 20. So here you see where there's two 10 frames, which coming down total would be 10, and then 1, 1. So that would be 11. So it also kind of helps with place value also, and we'll talk more about that in another video. All right, so here is 10, and then here would be 2. So you can see the 12, the 13, the 14, 15, the 16, 17, 18, 19, and then here's what 20 would look like, which is 2 full 10 frames. Now, how do we get students to this point? All right, that may be something we really need to look at right now, because maybe your students aren't here yet, and as you're assessing your students, you're going to find out that there's some major gaps in between being able to see these quantities. So we're going to start back at the beginning, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through the steps to where they can get to this point. Okay, as early as kindergarten, you would start with what's called a 5 frame. And what your goal is for this is to begin to establish multiples up to 5, because you want them to get to 5, and then we'll get to the 10. So you might ask them questions such as, what does 5 look like? And then they can put their 5 down here. Or then you may ask them to show 5 in another way. So they may do it this way, so they can see where it's 2 and 3. Or we can do it this way and have a 3 and 2. Now the object of this 2 is to have them read from left to right, because that's really the way numbers should be read. You know, if it's a 24, it needs to be read as 24, not as a 4 and a 2, which a lot of times students do because of the traditional algorithm. So you want them to read from left to right and to get into that habit before you move on. All right. Now you can have them show 5 in another way, such as 1 and 4, or just different ways, and then these are combinations to 5. Then once you get the combinations to 5, then you will work on up to get to combinations of larger numbers, which would be 10 next. Okay, now the next one would be, you would progress after you do your 5, then you would progress to 6, 7, 8, 9, and of course up to 10. But you want to look at the entire 10 frame. So at this point you've got 5 and 1 more. So that would be 6, 5 and 6. And then you want to talk about how many more would you need to make a 10. And then they can see that these blank ones would be 4. So one combination would be 6 and 4. So then you show 4. All right. Another way might be 5 and 2 on the side, which they would build that, and then that would be 7. How many more to make 10? 3 more. Now, one caution I want to give you is when they're doing this, you want to see the quantities. You don't just want to see patterns, because in that way they are what we call a one-to-one counter. So for example, if they're showing 5 like this, and then they might show 7 as that, then you can't see a quantity there of 7. You just see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's very important that you observe your students as they're working on these 10 frames. Okay, so then when they show 7, again, how many more to 10? 3. So then that would be 7 and 3 as a combination to 10. Now you want them to begin to keep working with this. You don't just do it quick. You know, they have to continue until they know the combinations to get to 10. So this may be something you will do other activities with it, but again, and in your books, it'll talk about the importance of understanding these combinations to 10, and they call it having that power of 10. And as we progress through the semester, you'll see more examples of why you need why students need to understand that power and be able to get to 10. Okay, kind of back to looking at what we did earlier would be something that would be your double 10 frames. And double 10 frames is what you would use to help with place value, but you also use these to help with working up beyond 10. So when you get to those teens. Now the teens are the hardest for children to learn because simply they don't make sense. If you think about it, you know, when you get to the 20s, you always say 21, 22, 23. But the 10s make no sense, or the teens, because what's a 12? You know, you don't say 10 and 2, you just say 12. 13 is always very confusing because it ends up being 31 and 13, and then they end up reversing those. So it's very hard. So this helps them to see what a teen number really is. So a 10 and one more, that would be 11. So then they can see the quantity. Now it's very important that they see quantity because the quantity is what helps them to develop a deeper understanding, a deeper conceptual understanding of what these numbers really are, other than just 2 ones, which a lot of times they don't even understand what that means. So then a 12 would be a 10 and a 2. And then they can see that this is the quantity of 12, and you would continue to work until you get to 20. So as you begin to work, and again, you know, you can also do the same activities that you did with 10, a 10 frame. You would use the 20, and then it would be, here's 13, how many more to get to 20? Or it would be, there's a 10, here's a 3, how many more to get to 10? And then they would see that that was a 7, and then they would be able to do 7, so 13 and 7 would be a combination to 20. All right, and again, lots of these activities are in your book. You just need to look and examine and see how you do those. And then there's all kinds of different activities that you can do with these. One activity was what I showed you earlier, but it could be a matching activity. They could have all these little ones, and they would have to look for these little 10 frames, and then they're not all, as you can see, they're not all filled. So then you can always ask for a number to show. Let's say you want to show 11, so they would know to pull a 10, a full 10, and a 1. Maybe you just want them to show 5, so they would know to pull this 5. So you would just give them a set of these, when you don't have to give them this many. There's quite a few in here. Just give them a set of those, and then you can give them a number to find. You can do the same thing with these that you had in your previous activity, the very first one that's in your book. You can give them these numbers, such as 18, and then they're going to have to find an 18. Let's see how fast we can find an 8. Well, lots of 10s. Ha. And there would be the 18 to represent a 10 and then 8. So then again, and this also helps again with place value, because they see that that 1 really represents a 10 and that 8 represents 8. Because so many times they don't read 18 when they start traditional algorithms. They'll read it as an 8 and a 1. So when you ask them what the total number is, they'll say 8 and a 1. Again, it's that single digits. Okay, so then there's other activities too that you can do with these. There's activities you can do with this set, and you can do the same thing. You can make it a matching game. But again, you want them to work as much as possible with the quantity of what the quantity looks like.